Hi, Jennifer, and welcome. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to sit down and have a conversation with us regarding your thoughts on the importance of professional development.
Hi, Robin. Thank you so much for having me. It really means a lot for me to be here.
Well, we're just so excited that you joined us today. And just to start off, I want to let you know that I truly enjoyed your article on why I don't ignore my own learning anymore. And in fact, I will be dropping the link to that article in the chat box for anyone interested in reading it for themselves. And we're just so eager to learn from your experience and expertise today. So I'm going to get started with our first conversation piece.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
So, Jennifer, tell us, how do you see teaching as evolving over the years from when you first started until now? How is it different than it was, for example, like 20 years ago?
Okay. Well, so the world has really changed over the last 20 years, and so have children. Because of this, education really can't remain the same. We can either choose to remain stagnant or we can grow together. And when I first started teaching, I didn't know better. I was trying to figure out this whole teaching world and, figure it all out. How does it work? And I had developed my own misconceptions and learned a lot along the way. And I taught the way that I learned back when I was in preschool 35 years ago. I kind of resulted to that because, again, I didn't really know any better. And as I evolved, my teaching evolved, but I had to make that choice. Many educators do really choose to remain stagnant for a variety of reasons because change is really hard sometimes. But if you really take a look around you, you'll see that change is happening every minute, every second of the day. And we need to be aware of these changes because our innocent children are seeing this and they are living this. When we ignore the change, we ignore the growing needs of our students. So I had started college in September of 2000 and completed my coursework by January 2005, roughly. I went to Kane University here in good old New Jersey. Um, and during that time, the internet was starting to pick up, right? Like it was just kind of starting to really evolve, I feel like, at that time. And there was no such thing as Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers back then. And I remember when I was hired, I spent time searching for ideas on the internet, but there was really little out there. And I remember that I ended up going to a teaching store in Watchung, New Jersey. I forget the name. I think it was like Borders or Benders or Beckers or something like that. And I spent a ton of money on mailbox books. And they had lots of different ideas and things in there. And I had the fourth edition of the creative curriculum that my school district provided. But at that time, I really viewed it as more as a textbook, not really a place where I could learn valuable ideas and strategies.
Mm.
So I look back over the last 20 years and I really see how much has changed in general. Technology has evolved. We've gone from books in print to books online. Those mailbox books I just mentioned are all digital with different subscriptions that you can purchase and download and pay for and whatnot. The creative curriculum now offers the cloud with the ability to access all of our beautiful materials and resources from your computer, from your device, like we're doing right now.
Amazing.
And no matter how much the research tells us to limit screen time, we have iPads and we have smart boards and learning apps and smart TVs, just to kind of name a few. Our family structures have changed. Our children are spending so much more time on devices than really ever before.
Yep.
More and more children are experiencing trauma, experiencing violence. They're exposed to things that I knew nothing about as a kid. And our society norms have changed. Our music has changed. What we view as entertainment has changed. The way we dress has changed. The way we approach certain topics and have conversations has changed. Our communication has changed, and not always for the better. People get into fights over the internet if somebody doesn't agree with them. We text more than we actually type. So this is the world that our children are growing up in, which really may be different from how we grew up. And we need to be on board with that and recognize this changing environment around us so that we can support our children in the best possible ways.
Right. That is so very true, Jennifer. I mean, if I think back to my time as a preschooler, the learning was so different than the way my children learned when they ended up going to preschool many, many years later. Education is ever changing. And as educators, it's so important, for us to keep up with all the latest research and information in order to be the best that we can be for those young lives we are responsible for educating every day. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. Um, what do you believe is the importance of ongoing professional development, and why specifically do you think it's important for early childhood educators?
Well, I really believe that as an educator, you never stop learning. As I just mentioned, much has changed. So if you stop learning, you're not going to know what has changed, right? So some of the teaching methods that we used years ago may not be the best methods for today's children, right? Because just as you mentioned, the way that you learned is vastly different from the way your children learned. I mean, I know the same thing. I have a 2 and a 3-year-old, and what they're doing in school is very different from what I did in school. I was actually talking to somebody the other day about how I would go home from my 2 or 3 hour preschool class and then watch Days of Our Lives with my mom. So it's just a different dynamic and a different world that we're living in now. So ongoing professional development really just helps to guide our understanding of the research-based best practices. And that's what's super important, is that research piece. And it's no longer good enough to say, well, I just know my kids, I know what they need. I'm with them all the time. I know them. You really need that evidence nowadays to back up that statement. And the early childhood years are so incredibly crucial. Research has shown us that. In early childhood, you, the teacher, are really where a child's story begins. Um, you are the only person that has the ability to make a child love learning or hate it. I've worked with a lot of teachers, and I've been involved with a lot of different classrooms. And I once knew a pre-K teacher who didn't even allow her children to use markers or crayons. They were only allowed to use pencils. And
Oh,
when
wow.
I would ask why, yeah, like I was, what? And when I asked why, I was told it was because it's what the children needed in kindergarten. They don't use markers and crayons in kindergarten. They use pencils only. So they can only use pencils in my class because I need to prepare them for kindergarten.
Oh,
I've known teachers who have forced children to sit down and write before they were even ready, resulting in a child shutting down and crying and being in tears. On the opposite end, I've known teachers who built really such incredible relationships with their students, and who always individualized learning for each child in each class that they had over the years. So the first teachers I mentioned really kind of ignored that professional development, whereas the others didn't.
right. I know exactly what you mean. And speaking of, children going to preschools, I was talking about my kids. My oldest daughter is now 23, and your oldest daughter or child is like 2 or 3 right now. And so even between my children and your children, everything has changed in the
Right.
last 20 some years when my child was in preschool. So very interesting to think about. And, I too have seen so many different styles of teaching over the years. The children that were thriving and learning that I noticed were the ones who were allowed the freedom to
Yeah.
explore their environment without unnecessary restrictions, like having to exclusively use pencils or being forced to start to read and write before they were developmentally prepared to do so.
Mhm.
So I totally hear you on all that. So, Jennifer, what would you say to a teacher who thinks that they already know everything there is to know about early childhood education and just doesn't think it's necessary for them to attend any further professional development?
Well, um,
Thoughts on
I
that?
would, well, I would actually share this story. So when my mom was diagnosed with stage 4 endometrial cancer, the first thing we did was our research. I didn't want just any cancer doctor for my mom. I wanted the best cancer doctor for my mom. So I wanted the doctor who knew the latest research and the most innovative treatments to fight my mom's specific cancer, right?
Right.
I wanted the doctor who wasn't going to cut my mom apart, but knew the least invasive surgical methods. I wanted a doctor who attended medical conferences, who mentored other doctors, who participated in clinical trials. I wanted the doctor who never stopped learning. My mom was given about 2 years to live, and she lived 4. And I believe it was because we gave her the best and we really looked for somebody who had all of those qualities.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
now, what if I substituted the word doctor for teacher, the word child for mother, the word stage 4 endometrial cancer with high quality professional development or high quality preschool? Um, Teachers really need to start thinking about themselves like the best doctors, even though they don't get paid as much as doctors. They need to start thinking about themselves as the best
But
doctors.
there'd be no doctors without teachers.
Exactly, exactly. There'd be no doctors without teachers. Like you mentioned, there'd be no lawyers, there'd be no politicians, there'd be no nurses if they didn't have good quality teachers, right? Guiding them along
All
that.
starts with us, people.
As I mentioned earlier, we are where their story begins.
Yeah.
So, nobody is perfect. No one. I am not perfect. You are not perfect. No one is. But no one gets to be viewed the best without putting in the continuous hard work. Uh, I always tell teachers, be the teachers that parents want to send their children to because you have the reputation of being incredible. Be the teacher you would want to send your own children to. You wouldn't want less for your own children. So why give less to the children who have been entrusted in your care? In order to be the best, you have to continue to learn and grow and just never stop learning. Be a mentor to other teachers. Be open to new ideas and new strategies. We don't know everything and we never will know everything because the research is always changing. Our children are always changing. So yeah, that's kind of how I would explain it.
Wow, what a powerful analogy. I mean, that is such a thought-provoking way to look at the teaching profession, right? When you personalize it and think to yourself, would I want my own children to have me as a teacher? Am I the kind of teacher that is constantly learning and growing in my abilities to be the very best for my students? Or am I stagnant and just getting through the days, right? So I love that analogy. What a great way to think about it. So could you share some effective approaches for getting the most out of a professional development session? What do you suggest people can do or change in order to, get the most out of a training that they attend?
Sure. So I made mention to some of this in the blog article that I wrote, and one of the most effective ways is to just really be present. It sounds so simple, right? Just
Right.
be present, regardless of the situation. It's so easy to get distracted. Maybe there's bad weather happening outside and you're, trying to figure out how you're going to get home and that's on the forefront of your mind. Or maybe the presenter isn't dynamic enough and you're like, oh gosh, I can't wait to get out of here. Or maybe you have a list of tasks on your mind a mile wide and you'd really just rather be elsewhere. But whatever the case, we have to put it aside and be present because only you are responsible for your own learning. That's it. You can have a teacher, a presenter who is amazing or who may not be, but they are not responsible for your own learning. You are. And only you can make the choice to be an active participant. So I relate it to thinking about the children in your own class, right? When you're teaching a certain skill to a child, what if they completely checked out and didn't pay attention because they'd rather be at home or they'd rather be elsewhere? You wouldn't want that for your students. You wouldn't want them to not pay attention to you or be preoccupied. I know that we don't give cell phones to children at this age, but even in a middle school or a high school classroom, we take cell phones away from children for a reason because we don't want them to be on the internet while we're trying to teach a lesson, right? So you wouldn't want that for your students. So why would you want that for yourself? And then I also think about being involved, right? participate, ask questions, don't hold back. Don't be the person that is afraid to say anything. This is your time to learn. And as I mentioned earlier, you have to take responsibility for that learning. So you don't know how many times I've been in Zoom meetings and Zoom trainings where half the participants won't even turn on their cameras.
Oh, yes. You and me both.
Yeah. I mean, they won't even turn on their cameras. And yes, there might be a variety of circumstances as to why. I mean, trust me, I am a mom of two littles. I have a 2 and 3-year-old little boy. I have been there. Sometimes they're sick. Sometimes I don't have childcare. Sometimes I can't turn my camera on. But if there isn't a special circumstance, then really be involved and be present. Zoom sessions are not just background noise. If the session isn't on Zoom, the same really applies. Like, put your phone on silent, step out if there's an emergency situation, or you need to send some emergency text messages, stay off Facebook, ask questions. Participate in activities, take notes. You don't know how many times I've gone into sessions and, there's no notebook or paper. People are just sitting there listening, which is great, but take notes, write down some new ideas. Be prepared and come prepared with all the materials that will really allow you to have maximum participation. So if it's a curriculum training, bring your curriculum materials. Even if you're not told, bring them, because you never know. As I mentioned, only you can make the most out of your training session. If you hold back, the trainer leaves, and then you're stuck in the same place you were when you walked in.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, being present, I love that. That is such, so like you said, such a simple thing to do, but so powerful, right? Just being there, being present, being in the moment, letting other distractions fade away so that you can really truly focus on what is being taught.
Yeah. And just, one other thing too, is just being open, right? There's so many things we are doing now that might contradict what best practices are and what that latest research in early childhood is. We need to be open to understanding why. We can't just say, oh, I've been teaching for blah, blah, blah years, and I know what works. I know what my students need. Because maybe you do and maybe you don't. But if you don't at least try something new and give it a really good try, I'm not talking about trying it one day, trying it 2 days. It takes 28 days to build a habit. So if you aren't open to at least trying something new and giving it a really, really good try, then you'll never know if it's more effective than what you're already doing now. And, teaching is really the only profession where schools will invest so much money in curriculum and PD. And some teachers will look at their peers at the end of a session and say, I'm not doing that. I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing for the last X amount of years. And they just are extremely closed off to making that attempt to try something new for whatever the case may be, for whatever the reason it may be. And I just say, why not try? Trying is hard. Change is hard. Starting over is hard. Anytime you adopt a new curriculum, it's almost like starting over again. It doesn't matter if you've been teaching for 1 year or 50 years, you're basically starting over again because you have to learn this new material. But teaching is also really hard. Teaching is not an easy profession. And if it feels too hard sometimes, then we really need to reach out for help. There's no shame in that. Making mistakes is how we all learn. Sometimes we're going to fall and we're going to fall really, really hard. But all it takes is just that one person to ignite a spark that lifts us back up and says, hey, you can do this. You got this.
Right. I love that. And I agree that there's really no way to leave a training without some newfound knowledge, without actual participation. You're not going to take anything away if you're not giving anything while you're there. So changing our mindset is, really the first step towards active participation.
Absolutely.
So Jennifer, how can professional development affect quality learning outcomes for children in your care? Please give us your thoughts.
Well, have you ever taught a lesson you found on Pinterest only to have it be a great big flop? Like,
I have.
I have too. It's like looks amazing on Pinterest. All the kids are engaged. There's this beautiful product at the end, right? I think they call them Pinterest fails, right? Or you've spent hours on rote memorization skills like the calendar, right? Just to hear your children say in January, "Oh, Miss So-and-so, yesterday I went to the beach." When you know it's January and yesterday there was a blizzard and there was no school, right? So I'm not saying that Pinterest is bad. There are many talented educators who post ideas for others on there, but those are really just ideas, right? There's no validity around those ideas in relation to your students, their backgrounds, their culture, their family structure. So the same applies to concepts that are merely rote memorization. You can do rote memorization until you're blue in the face, but it means nothing if there's no application attached. That's why we hear responses like, "Oh, yesterday, I went to the beach and there was a blizzard." So really attending high quality professional development can help us see all that. It can help us see that it's not all about those little cutesy things or all that stuff, but about how we instruct our students in a way that is developmentally appropriate, individualized, and truly meets their needs. It can provide us with the innovative strategies to accomplish that. So high quality PD can really help us to see where the gaps are and help us fill those gaps in, especially in these crucial early childhood years.
Right, exactly. And that's why it's so important for programs to adopt a research-based curriculum, like the
Absolutely.
creative curriculum or high scope or tools of the mind, to name a few that are offered through Grow NJ Kids in New Jersey, right? Because if they're just getting all their ideas off of Pinterest, I can't even say that word, but you all know what I mean. If you're just getting those ideas online and you're not actually having anything to support the idea, and it's cute, and the parents may be like, "This is sweet coming home and everything," but it really doesn't have a whole lot of meaning behind it for the children other than it is cute, right?
Right.
So,
And I mean, I'll be honest with you, when I was in the classroom and even with my own children, right? I've learned it's not all about the stuff and it's not all about the materials, right? It's about what we do and how we instruct children based on our learning objectives, based on our state standards. We can approach it in a variety of different ways. My children have the best time sitting in a laundry basket and pretending that it's a car and they're going on a trip, and my youngest son always wants to be the driver. They gain so much more from that experience, and they have a playroom filled with toys and unit blocks and all that kind of stuff. I once had a teacher who looked at we were using the creative curriculum in the school that I worked at when I became a coach, and she was using an intentional teaching card, and she looked at the materials on there and she said to me, "I can't do this. It says I need geoboards and I don't have geoboards, so I cannot do this lesson." And so I looked at her and I said, "Is the objective that we're trying to meet using geoboards? Like, is the objective to master the use of a geoboard?"
right.
And she said, "No." And I said, "So what is the objective?" And she said, "Well, to make shapes." And so I said, "Well, what else do you have in your classroom that you can use to make shapes and to have the children make shapes?" And she goes, "Blocks? Then use blocks. Popsicle sticks? Use popsicle sticks. Play-Doh? Absolutely." The possibilities are endless. If you don't
Absolutely.
have one type of material, you have 75 other million different materials that you can choose from. And sometimes it's as easy as cheapo little popsicle sticks as opposed to these fancy geoboards, right? So there's a lot you can do, and professional development, coaching, conversations with the people around you can help you see all that.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of schools don't even have the means to purchase something like a geo board, but I'm so glad you pointed that out, that there's so many other different types of materials that will do just basically exactly the same thing, right? It's just not the material doesn't matter as much as the intent behind it and the
Right.
way in which you present it. So
Exactly.
wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And I totally get where you're coming from with the laundry basket being your children's favorite thing. That was a favorite of mine as well. And my kids often preferred the large box to play with than the toy that came in the box, and they were given something for their birthday
Absolutely.
or something.
Oh
So
yeah.
kids
Yeah.
find all kinds of things, to make interesting games out of that we don't really
Us
have to spend all the money we do on them.
writing with a stick and some dirt. We were at the
There you
park
go.
yesterday. We were in the baseball field where all that dirt is, and we had sticks and we were writing in the dirt with the sticks. Nothing fancy. It's free. It's right outside.
You go.
Supposed to be a
It's all
time.
more fun, because it's something different.
Yeah, and they were covered in dirt, and that's okay. There was learning that took place there. A lot of
Oh,
sensory too. So,
perfect. Love it. So tell us, Jennifer, how do we shift our thinking from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset? What are some of the qualities of a growth mindset, and what can encourage a person to start to make this shift?
so that's hard sometimes, right? Especially if you're so used to doing something in the same way. I think about the research professor Brene Brown. I don't know if you're familiar.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. Love
Brene
Brené Brown.
Brown. Yeah, she's great. And I think about her, and she spent the last 2 decades studying the ideas of courage, vulnerability, shame, empathy. And in many of her TED Talks, she talks about how vulnerability takes great courage. And she's absolutely right. It does. To be vulnerable takes really great courage. And, no one ever wants to admit to themselves when they might be in the wrong.
Mhm.
And taking ownership of that can be really difficult. And once we allow ourselves to be a little vulnerable, we can make some great strides in building relationships, having empathy, and really accepting change. So we really need to trust in ourselves and believe that your talents can be developed. And through hard work, effective strategies, constructive feedback from others, you could achieve so much more than continuing with a fixed mindset. So, really being open to that idea is going to help you with that growth mindset. And as I mentioned, you can achieve so much more when you open your mind a little bit. And really, it goes back to what I was saying before. By allowing yourself to take the time to be open and present during your professional development, you're allowing your mind to take away something new. Maybe it's the most minimal thing, but always challenge yourself to take away one new idea. Eventually, that one new idea will lead to many more new discoveries.
Hmm. I like that. Changing your mindset, it can be so very hard. But to your point, challenging yourself to take away just one new thing can lead to that ripple effect, right? And before long, you'll be attaining new knowledge everywhere you look. So just changing your mindset can make such a huge difference, but getting there can be hard.
Yes, yeah, and it just kind of starts with, at the end of a PD session, take a minute to reflect. Don't just run out the door, even though I know we have things to do and places to go, right? But sit for a minute and either write it on a Post-it or write it in your notebook that you brought with you, because now you're going to be bringing notebooks and taking notes. And just sit and take a minute to reflect. Reflection is so powerful. And think about the things that you've heard, that you've learned, and just write down one thing that you learned that you maybe didn't know before, or even a validation. Maybe it's one thing that you can build upon that validates something you're already doing, but allows you to take it a little bit further and a little bit deeper.
Mm. Those are great thoughts to take away. Thank you so much for sharing those suggestions. I think those are great. All right, we're getting down to the end of our conversation here. And one last thing I just want you to reiterate for us is whether or not you think the commitment to be consistently learning and staying current is a necessity in early childhood education.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As I mentioned in the beginning of this interview, change is everywhere. It's
Mhm.
everywhere. Everywhere you look around, something is changing and evolving. And, especially in early childhood is constantly evolving. We can continue to remain stagnant and ignore what's happening, or we can grow together, really, in order to reach, all of today's youngest learners in the most effective ways.
Wow. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I have come away with some powerful new concepts regarding professional development, and I'm actually really eager to put your suggestions to good use in my own professional development that I take next. And I'm sure everyone else is feeling exactly the same and refreshed and energized, thinking about professional development with a whole new mindset. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation and speaking with you. And I really hope that your participants will take away something new and have really benefited from this. It's a really important conversation to have, and I'm really, really grateful to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much.